Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Let's start with China's economy, because yesterday we talked about unease and narrative control, and today Beijing is counterpunching with raw numbers. China closed out 2025 with a trade surplus just under $1.2 trillion. That's not spin, that's customs data. After all the talk of tariffs, decoupling, and economic slowdown, Beijing is pointing at the scoreboard and saying exports still win games. Shipments to the United States fell sharply, about 20%, but that loss was more than offset by exports to Southeast Asia, Africa, and Europe. Africa, in particular, soaked up a huge increase in Chinese goods. This is the same pivot we've been tracking, but now it's quantified. The quieter detail is that this export strength is compensating for weak domestic demand. Factories are running, consumers are not spending like they used to, and foreign markets are carrying the load. Russia, meanwhile, is no longer the easy outlet it was last year. China-Russia trade declined in 2025 for the first time in 5 years. That doesn't mean the partnership is collapsing, but it does mean the honeymoon phase is over. Chinese car exports to Russia dropped hard after Moscow raised levies to protect its own industry, and lower oil prices cut into the value of Russian energy shipments. This is an update on something we've been watching. Beijing will support Moscow, but not at any price. When the economics stop working cleanly, sentimentality disappears fast. Yesterday, we talked about pressure points outside Asia, and today the Venezuela situation adds real gravity to that discussion. The U.S. removal of Nicolas Maduro didn't just shake Caracas, it shook Beijing. Venezuela wasn't a side project for China. It was a flagship relationship built on oil, loans, and political alignment. Chinese envoys were still trying to stabilize things when U.S. forces moved. Now Beijing is staring at billions in questionable debt and an uncertain future for its access to Venezuelan crude. This ties directly back to yesterday's conversation about the Western Hemisphere snapping back into focus for Washington. China isn't expanding influence in Latin America right now. It's trying not to lose what it already paid for. Layered onto that is trade pressure coming from multiple directions. Mexico has slapped heavy tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, Panama has stepped away from Belt and Road, and Honduras is wobbling on Taiwan recognition. Taken together, it's not collapse, but it is contraction. Beijing's regional ambitions are running into a much colder environment. On technology, yesterday we talked about competition and compute. Today, we get a clean example of how messy that competition really is. The United States formally approved exports of NVIDIA's H200 AI chips to China. On paper, that looked like a thaw. In practice, Chinese customs authorities quickly told agents the chips weren't permitted to enter, and domestic firms were warned off unless they had very specific justifications. This is a classic Beijing move. No loud announcement, no press conference, just a quiet choke point. The H200 is significantly more powerful than previously allowed chips, and Chinese firms reportedly wanted them badly. Beijing's decision to slow or block imports suggests this isn't just about technology. It's leverage ahead of high-level diplomacy and a nudge to accelerate domestic alternatives. Rare earths are the other side of that tech story, and today's data reinforces a point we've made before. Despite announcing export controls on several key rare earth elements earlier this year, China's total rare earth exports in 2025 hit their highest level in more than a decade. There was a brief dip after controls were announced. Then shipments rebounded once deals were cut and inventories adjusted. This isn't China weaponizing supply chains with a hammer. It's using a scalpel. Enough pressure to remind everyone who dominates processing, not enough to provoke an immediate collective backlash. On the military front, this is very much a continuation day. New imagery suggests another massive Type 055 destroyer has entered service, pushing China's count into double digits. These ships are not subtle. They're built to escort carriers, control sea space, and complicate U.S. operations in a Taiwan scenario. Several of the newest hulls are likely headed toward the Eastern Theater, which aligns neatly with the steady drumbeat of exercises around Taiwan we discussed yesterday. No fireworks, no declarations, just more steel in the water. That steel is showing up elsewhere too. The Philippines reported an uptick in Chinese Coast Guard, Navy, and maritime militia vessels in contested areas of the West Philippine Sea early this year. The update here isn't just numbers, it's proximity. Chinese vessels are operating closer to foreign ships involved in joint activities with Manila. It's friction by design, not a crisis trigger, but constant contact meant to normalize Chinese presence and test everyone's patience. Up north, NATO leadership is sounding alarms about China and Russia working together in the Arctic. Joint patrols and seabed mapping operations are expanding near Alaska and Canada. This builds on yesterday's discussion about the Arctic sliding out of its quiet phase. Russia brings geography and icebreakers, China brings money and long-term ambition. Together, they're laying groundwork for future military and infrastructure options in a region the West used to treat as strategic background noise. Not everyone wants to be caught standing too close to Beijing and Moscow right now. Iran quietly pulled back from active participation in a planned joint naval exercise with China and Russia in South Africa, opting for observer status. This came right after Washington threatened tariffs on countries doing business with Tehran. It's a small move, but it's telling. Even partners who share grievances with the U.S. are calculating the cost of open alignment. Inside China, the security clampdown we talked about yesterday is now showing its technical side. The Ministry of State Security issued warnings about leaks of surveying, mapping, and drone data. Multiple cases were cited where sensitive geographic information was mishandled, subcontracted improperly, or transferred abroad. This isn't just bureaucratic paranoia. As China builds infrastructure and military capability, controlling the data that describes terrain, facilities, and logistics becomes a national security priority. Geography is power, and Beijing is locking it down. And while China tightens internally, U.S. courts are reminding everyone that espionage is still very much alive. A former U.S. Navy sailor received a sentence of nearly 17 years for selling ship manuals, operational details, and exercise information to a Chinese intelligence handler he met online. This wasn't a movie plot. It was low-dollar, persistent recruitment using encrypted apps and basic tradecraft. Yesterday, we talked about information warfare in the abstract. Today, this is what it looks like in real life: slow, unglamorous, and damaging. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on the Middle East and the DPRK. This is free for Substack subscribers. Starting January 16th, new Substack subscribers will move to a paid model. If you're already subscribed on Substack before then, nothing changes. You'll keep full access to everything free forever. New subscribers after January 15th will receive the daily written brief, weekly deep dives on economics, sanctions, and more for a monthly fee. So if you're not on Substack yet, don't worry. Just head to restrictedhandling.com and subscribe now for free and get the content free forever.